Five. Okay. All right. Thank you. Really now. I feel this is over. Okay. So people are sitting down. I'll let you get comfortable. Okay. So our next speaker. Thank you, Noha. Every time. So I gotta tell you something. I drink coffee like a fiend. It's a problem. But every cup of coffee I've purchased since I started hearing Noha's talk, I've looked at it and been like, why am I drinking this? I don't know. And yet I drank it, but at least I thought about it. So I urge you all to stare at your coffees when you buy them and say, what am I doing? Okay, so our next speaker is one of the most ambitiously multidisciplinary people you will meet at this university. When I first read his application, I said, you're a what and a what? He is a English and biomedical engineering major, double major, and he has a really interesting perspective on art and creativity and exploring new avenues for creativity and producing things. And he noticed that whenever we talk about artists, we have this perception of them, and that there's an artist is this kind of person. He talks about this in his talk. I'll let him get to it, but he's here to challenge what a lot of you think as artists. And if it were to come from an artist, you might be like, oh, this is coming from an artist. But it's coming from someone who really has a wide range of perspectives, and I really think that he will give you a lot to think about. So next, please give it up for Mr. Scott Delisle.
Everybody hear me? Good?
Yes.
Awesome. All right. Peruse for a minute. Who here, raise your hand if you recognize any of these names. Awesome. They're all very famous for their contributions to art and philosophy, but what's less known is that they made these contributions to their respective field while battling mental illness. But is the art due to the illness or vice versa? Well, I think the best place for us to start our conversation about art and where it comes from is with the question, what is art? Now I know, it's the most artsy question you can ask, but one that really has no definite answer. Everyone from Greek philosophers, modern American authors, and all of us have tried to define art and what it really means. And personally, I think a quote from my favorite author, William Faulkner, sums it up pretty well, when he said, the aim of every artist is to arrest motion, which is life, by artificial means, and hold it fixed so that 100 years later, when a stranger looks at it, it moves again, since it is life. So works of art are essentially paralyzed moments of life that the artist makes universally accessible for all of us. Now, not far from any conversation about art is the notion of the suffering artist. So what do you think of when I ask you to think of a typical artiste? A lot of people think of something like this. They think of a troubled soul embroiled in contemplation and self-judgment, sensitive to a fault, struggling to find the means to carry on with only one ear. What about artsy films? For those who like films, you think of maybe French, black and white, sad piano music. So this association assumes, naturally, that the inspiration for their art comes from this suffering. So I was interested by this association and where it came from. So I went to the Boston Book Festival this past October and saw a panel with Paul Harding, who is a Pulitzer Prize-winning author from the Boston area. And the title of the panel was Fiction, Out of Darkness. And it was all about the role of negative emotion in literature. I know what you're thinking. It's like the best Saturday ever, right? So his book, Tinkers, is a great example. It's all about a dying man's memories of his abusive and epileptic father and his eventual committal to an institution. And maybe it's just me, but I think it's pretty dark subject matter. And whether or not Paul Harding is affected by mental illness, I don't know. But it has been shown that a very large number of our classic artists have been. So here are some examples of some artists who exhibit signs of a mood disorder, either unipolar or bipolar, who lived before 1900. There are names we all know up there. There's Dickens, Kafka, Tchaikovsky, etc., etc. And here are some examples of artists who live after 1900. Again, names we all know. Hemingway, Faulkner, Cobain, Warhol. And so while it's obvious that not all artists have been affected by mental illness. For some reason, a large percentage of our most well-known and revered artists have been. For instance, lists of top 10 most inspirational painters include some of these artists: Michelangelo, Picasso, Goya. Lists of top novels are filled and topped by works written by these authors. Ulysses, Great Gatsby, The Sound and the Fury. Are the works themselves depressing? Well, I don't think works of art can really ever be depressing, because they always are trying to teach us. They want to help us understand, not really tear us down. So is this theoretical trend supported by any actual evidence? And if so, what does that mean for the notion of the suffering artist? So one of the primary texts exploring this link is a book called Touched with Fire by Dr. Kay Redfield Jameson. And in it she collects a huge number of psychological studies on the link, covering both historical and contemporary examples. From the first observations by Greek philosophers like Aristotle, who said, "Why is it that all men who are outstanding in philosophy, poetry, the arts are melancholic?" Through Renaissance, the Romantic period, itself the most prestigious creative writing program in the country, showed that 80% of writers met criteria for any affective disorder, a major affective disorder, compared with 30% of controls. And this number, 30%, is actually much larger than that of the general population, which is expected to be 5 to 8%. Going even further, suicide rates among artistic groups have been shown to be up to 18 times higher than the normal rate. That's among poets, for whatever reason. Going even further, artistic productivity has been shown to increase during periods of increased mood, which are referred to as manic states, in artists with no history of treatment versus artists with history of treatment. So essentially, on the left, you can see that mood and productivity follow a positive correlation in those artists that did not treat their illness. And on the right, you see that mood and productivity have a negative correlation in artists that did treat their illnesses. So this led some people to suggest that people working in artistic fields shouldn't be treated for their illness, so as to make them more productive. But as anybody who's taken a statistics course knows, correlation does not imply causation. And I think that a supposed correlation is no reason to withhold treatment from somebody with a clinically defined illness. So there's tons of speculation as to why these relationships exist still. Some think it's because we overanalyze the lives of our artists so much, looking for some reason that they stand out, and anything we find is clearly evidence of insanity. Is it genetic? It has been shown that direct relatives, that being parents and siblings of writers, are 18% of them have an affective disorder compared to 2% of controls. Now, I don't want to use suffering and mental illness interchangeably, because they're not at all. But I think that's how society defines the tortured artist, really, at least while naive stigmas concerning mental health still remain. But wherever it comes from, there is an undeniable correlation between mental illnesses, in particular bipolar illnesses, and higher creative reasoning. But does this correlation have a limit? And how does it fit into the creative process? So to simplify this process, I'm going to split it into 5 steps, which I got from the book Creativity by Dr. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. He broke it into preparation or immersion into the issues that drive us. Incubation, where subconscious connections are made. Insight, sometimes called the eureka moment. Evaluation, where the artist evaluates their idea and decides if it's worth pursuing or not. And elaboration, which is where Edison's observation that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration comes in. So this method oversimplifies it, and a lot of times there are multiple steps happening out of order or at the same time, but for our purposes, I think it serves as a pretty good model overall. Now I think suffering will mostly affect steps 1, 4, and 5. In step 1, the artist is given their source for the idea, which in this case would come from a negative place. Would Kurt Vonnegut have written Slaughterhouse-Five if he wasn't a prisoner of war in Dresden? Would Vincent van Gogh have painted Starry Nights if he wasn't in an asylum at the time and did have both of his ears? Now we can never know, but this raises another question. Should the artist be separated from their art? Well, I think they can be because art is universal, and none of us ever require any biographical information on the artist to feel and interpret what they leave for us. In step 4, the artist evaluates their idea, which could lead to the dismissal of countless brilliant ideas simply due to the mood of the artist at the time. And in step 5, the work is put into the creation. When somebody is in a depressed state, there's little motivation to do anything at all. Manic states, as was shown before, have led to increased productivity, but they're also complemented by very, very dangerous periods of recklessness and instability. So I guess the question really is, are any of these horrifying sources of creativity and mood swings needed for any of us to be great artists? The short answer is no. Are there a disproportionately large number of affected individuals in the highest echelon of creative thinkers? Perhaps. But have all great artists been affected by great suffering? Most definitely not. Art's all about the individual perceptions that we have of life, and creativity is a means that we can all use to extract that art. Creative inspiration can be drawn from anywhere, and is in fact at its most powerful when drawn from unexpected sources. Now that being said, suffering does exist, and we'll all suffer during our lives, some more than others. There's nothing that can protect us from that. One of my favorite modern authors, Jonathan Safran Foer, said, "You cannot protect yourself from sadness without protecting yourself from happiness." It's what you do with that suffering. That's what this is all about. Now, I've struggled with mental illness for many years now, and I can tell you that it doesn't do anything to help with creativity at all. I wish, yeah. But I can tell you that art is a very effective coping mechanism. And that's how it is with all art. It's all about the individual process, not what it derives from, because the source doesn't define the product. Its creativity is always fluid, it's always moving, it's always experiencing. The most successful artists are the ones who have experienced the most of what the world has to offer, because then they can channel all the life they've exposed themselves to into their work. Art is unique in that way, and then once we're finished creating it, it takes on a life of its own. The most creative works of art are the ones that force us to think the most, that make us feel something at once familiar and unique. Now, Kurt Vonnegut said that writing was a practical joke, because if you make people laugh or cry about little black marks on sheets of white paper, what is that but a practical joke? Art's all about taking something that on its own is totally unremarkable, cut up stone, put liquids on canvas, and making the audience feel something new or something familiar in a new way through experiencing it. And we all have our own observations. We all have our own ideas. We all have our own stories to write and paintings to paint. And I think that putting any sort of limit on the creative process and saying that some people are better at it than others through some sort of predetermination limits one of the most enjoyable experiences in life, that of creating, or as Vonnegut called it, becoming. So I'm going to leave you, as he often did in his speeches, with a homework assignment. Practice an art sometime today or tomorrow. Create something. It doesn't have to be a masterpiece. You don't even have to like it at the end. You can even get rid of it afterwards. And for just this time, don't show it to anybody. Because it's all about the individual process, not the end result. Just express yourself using ink, clay, paint, music, movement, whatever. It doesn't matter. Because the feeling of creativity, really, is a way to... Oh, I skipped. And I forgot actually the most important part. The whole secret of this whole thing is not to suffer for it. So just don't suffer for it. Just enjoy it. Or as Paul Engel, who was longtime director of the Iowa Writers' Workshop, put it, don't take it all so seriously. Because the feeling of creating is a way to explore yourself, understand yourself, and ultimately to reward yourself. So go experience it for yourselves as you all